Dear colleagues over the world, welcome. I'm thrilled to introduce you to this session and, as a philosopher and lawyer, to have the opportunity to ask the questions. What does it mean to win in academia? What are the different ways we can win from greater inclusion and diversity? What are academic culture and its relationship to diversity? How are academic culture and evaluation practices related to scientific excellence? Let us question the principles we follow in academia. Let us study the logic of our current practices of appraisal. Let us explore the potential benefits of reshaping our norms and academic culture. And let us do this based on the best knowledge available in the world. I hope that the stories we tell during this hour will remind you of experiences in your career. I hope that the studies we describe will be informative. I'm curious to hear your thoughts and look forward to a conversation. When I think about inclusion, I do not think first about a statistical concept or an abstract idea. When I think about inclusion, I think about the person who is being included. I think about acceptance, a sense of belonging, and the feeling of being connected. As we know from multiple studies, a sense of belonging is correlated with intellectual achievement. On the other side of the coin, discrimination and exclusion create a lack of a sense of belonging and connectedness. Isolation and low social stature affect the ability to participate and connect with others. By feeling connected to others, being comfortable in our academic environment and academic culture, and not having to fight for our position every day, it is much easier for us to be creative and productive. We can create synergy around us and be the scientists who advance science. Our sense of belonging as a scholar depends on the academic culture around us. What is an academic culture? It is the academic institution's environment of scholarly engagement and values. Its practices of celebrating achievement, evaluating students and scholars, and building its community. There are many ways in which academic culture motivates scholars to strive towards excellence and pursue new ideas. This motivation can be built, for example, through active scholarly engagement, a clear reinforcement of values, and the alignment of these values to the values pursued in the best contemporary academic environments. Imagine being part of an academic culture where your conversations among the faculty and graduate students are focused on ideas, their challenges, and new papers. And then imagine not being part of such an academic culture as a scholar or researcher. Imagine being part of an academic culture built on a firm and reiterated set of values where the academic community voices aspirations for true excellence. And then imagine being part of an academic community that does not do that, or even consider what values they stand for and why this matters. Imagine being part of an academic culture that takes its aspirations seriously and comprehends the value of equality, inclusiveness, and fair treatment of scholars, considering their intersectional profiles and circumstances. And now imagine being not part of such an academic culture as a scholar. You can notice the stark difference between the circumstances for research and growth. Academic cultures, evaluative practices, and their impact on scientific excellence are at the heart of this session's discussions. I invite you to think with me about academic cultures, particularly about the kind of culture that leads to scientific excellence and the delivery of policy advice based on the best knowledge available around the world. To lead the way towards a discussion, I start exploring these topics among an exceptional group of scholars that represents both young and senior academies, 9 different countries, and disciplines across social sciences, humanities, medical sciences, natural and technical sciences. Based on studies among children, what matters for their intellectual achievement and creativity are the sense of belonging and acceptance, which support confidence. The same factors have a hugely important effect on our achievements and excellence in the academic environments of our universities and research institutes. Yet, as we will hear from many speakers in this session, there are many practices and barriers in academic environments, which restrain researchers on their path toward excellent scholarship and silence their voices thus not allowing their scientific advice to reach policymakers. We all know that thinking differently is hard and often unwelcome. And yet, we all know that thinking differently can also lead to the creation of Apple. If we seek equivalent achievements in science, why then do we sustain academic cultures and evaluation practices which slow down or drive away so many scholars who think differently on the way? Professor Anu Realo, the past president of the European Association of Personality Psychology and a member of the Estonian Academy of Sciences and the Academia Europaea, invites us to think not only about academic culture in general, but about a healthy academic culture, which is needed if we want researchers to stay in academia.
At the start of my postdoc in Belgium, I used to spend a part of my Sundays working in my office on campus. I was new to the country and work offered comfort and relieved my homesickness, especially in weekends. One time, my supervisor popped into my office and said how much he envied me because I could spend my Sundays doing research while he had to go and have lunch with his family. He left before I could tell him that I would swap places with him any time. It took me a few more months to realize that he didn't actually hate his family and that he was simply swamped with teaching, supervising and administrative responsibilities, which left him with no time to do research he loved. Several studies have shown that academics work more than 10 hours per day, including weekends. And yet, as I have learned myself in a hard way, this is still not enough to excel at everything we're expected to do. A long hours culture results in poor work-life balance, which leads to high levels of stress, reduced job productivity and satisfaction, and even burnout. It affects all, but especially those who have families and parental or caring responsibilities. Each year, more and more doctorate students are telling me that the expectation to work long hours is pushing them away from academia. So something needs to be urgently done to stop normalizing overworking at the expense of academics' well-being and their family and social life. How can we promote a healthy work-life balance in higher education and encourage young researchers to stay in academia?
Imagine working in an environment where you can confidently say, I belong to an amazing, vibrant community of people who uplift each other, take care of each other, even when we are struggling. Such an environment supports doing excellent research, inspiring students and building groundbreaking projects with peers. Such a philosophy helps to stay focused and be resilient to setbacks. It helps to persist in the pursuit of excellence. Now imagine working in such an environment and being part of such a philosophy as a scholar, independent of the social categories you happen to belong to and independent of your intersectional profile. Let me introduce you to Ester Oras, a recognized archaeochemist and a young researcher in Estonia, who explains what it means to talk about intersecting social categories in one's profile and why we might want the considerations of intersectionality to be part of our academic evaluation procedures or the pursuit of excellence.
There are different possibilities for identifying and discussing discrimination and privilege. One of those theoretical frameworks is intersectionality. The term was first coined by Kimberly Crenshaw, a Black feminist scholar, in her 1991 article Mapping the Margins. The concept was initially aimed at deepening the understanding of discrimination against Black working-class women, where the categories of gender, race and class intersect to produce disadvantages for them. However, more broadly, intersectionality means cross-sectioning of different social categories such as gender, age, sexuality, race and socioeconomic status, which can be further nuanced by geographic location, religion, disability and so on. The point is that the person's identity and how they experience privilege and discrimination are a conglomerate of very different social categories. For instance, A single expatriate female scholar in her early 30s making her way towards tenure-track position might have a lot more in common with the white, well-established male professor in his late 50s whose kids have left house than with the local single mother of two in her 30s working on a temporary contract. The question is, which of these very different social categories need to be prioritized for increasing inclusivity in academia? Perhaps it's time to look beyond classical dichotomies of male and female, old and young, and expand our target groups with family status, place of origin, and ethnicity. What is your intersectional profile? And which of your intersectional categories and subsequent needs should be better covered at your home institute?
Social categories are a result of categorization, and categorizing is a normative activity, something that requires care, something that requires justification, something that can snowball into new categories as well as consequences we have never intended. Because of these risks, as a lawyer, I would think it is something that also requires measures for mitigating risks and minimizing harms. While we mostly think that there is a need to give preference to people belonging to a particular social category, perhaps we should step back and think about it again. The question has perhaps changed. For fair treatment, we should not ask so much perhaps which of some given social categories ought to be prioritized, but which combinations of categories make individuals vulnerable to discrimination and exclude excellent researchers from academia. There is a global market for talent, and as part of it, a global market for talented scholars. One of the components of the intersectional profiles of many researchers on that global market is the fact that they work in non-native countries and use a non-native tongue in their everyday interactions and research. This comes not only with personal challenges, but also those directly related to work in academia. As Olli-Ville Laukkanen, a leader of the Young Academy of Finland, explains next, we would treat our global talents more fairly and achieve much more in science if we were able to lower the barriers of social integration of international researchers.
The number of international faculty and staff is continuously increasing at universities worldwide. For example, at Finnish universities, the number of international researchers has tripled since 2010. Although the internationalization of university faculty and staff is widely considered to promote innovation and research excellence, foreign academics do not always find it easy to integrate into a new professional environment. In many cases, international faculty and staff lack knowledge of the local academic culture, making it difficult for them to participate in various professional activities. Furthermore, the lack of social contacts and inability to communicate in the local language may severely limit their academic development. It is therefore crucial that universities offer workshops and training courses that support the integration of international researchers. Moreover, the importance of social integration shouldn't be underestimated. The lack of social contacts may cause foreign scholars to feel like outsiders in their work environment and also make them passive professionally. Consequently, better measures are needed to monitor and enhance the social integration of international researchers.
The social integration of international researchers is essential for their academic development, for the same reasons that the sense of belonging is instrumental for their intellectual achievement. Social integration helps to create a sense of belonging. Inclusion is also a matter of fair treatment in academic environments. There is another closely connected matter of fair treatment in academic environments, and that is fair evaluation of scholars. At the beginning of this session, I asked you to imagine being part of distinctly opposite kinds of academic cultures. I have a sense that while we do want to compare the work and achievements of scholars across the globe, there is something unfair about comparing the achievements of scholars who have been able to thrive in an excellent and supportive academic culture to the achievements of those who try to succeed despite unhealthy or hostile culture in their academic environment. without taking into account the difference in the hurdles they have had to cross to attain their goals. At the very least, if we were to make such a comparison of achievements, we would need to account for the circumstances as well. As the political philosopher Gwen Bradford explains in her book Achievement, it turns out that difficulty, perhaps surprisingly, plays a central part in characterizing achievements and their value. Achievements are worth the effort. It is much easier to achieve excellence in the midst of supportive academic culture than to achieve it among unsupportive and a hostile one. Taking this into account, perhaps we might be more accurate about achievement when acknowledging that any academic achievement is also a product of its circumstances. When we talk about scientific excellence, we might not be actually looking for achievements, or at least not achievements in the sense of succeeding despite dire circumstances. It is more plausible that we look for the best knowledge available around the world and the best solutions to the problems we are seeking to solve. In search of the best knowledge, it is in our interest to include those who work specifically on the problems that call for solution, even if they think differently than others, even if their voice has generally been less loud, and even if they have operated at the margins. It is in our interest to include them so that we can achieve the best results. But let us also note that we need to include them also because inclusion is a matter of fair treatment in academic environments. Without fair treatment, I'd argue any academic environment, no matter how successful, lacks legitimacy. For me as a legal philosopher, this resonates with a long debate about law as an embodiment of fairness and as an institution of welfare. The best understanding that we have of law is that while it may present us with tools for achieving certain welfare goals, it would not be legitimate unless it was also inherently fair. With these distinctions, I'm happy to introduce you to a panel of young researchers whose joint talk helps to gain an overview of the practices of academic evaluation of scholars around the world. Please welcome the past and present leaders of the Scientific Excellence Working Group at the Global Young Academy, Yensi Flores Bueso, Boon-Han Lim, Carlo Di Politi, and Pradeep Kumar. As they will explain, there is a distinct impact that social categorization and some methods of evaluation have on the opportunities for scholars who have not followed a standard career path in a particular field of study. Notice that these practices end up limiting the potential diversity we could have in academia, a diversity of methods, experiences, and understandings that has been found to lead to excellent science thanks to generating a richer environment for creativity and innovation.
As a native Honduran now living in Ireland, I've had the opportunity to work in a country where research is nascent and also in countries with advanced research institutions. Importantly, this raised my awareness of the diverse skills that researchers need to thrive in environments with very different social, cultural, and economic backgrounds. I have also witnessed that when we look for jobs, funding, or promotions, we're all evaluated as if we followed a career path that only fits the reality of a very small group of people. Now, by limiting the opportunities to those who do not fit this mold, these practices could be limiting diversity in academia. In this regard, a vast body of evidence has found that diverse research environments increase creativity, innovation, and problem solving, ultimately benefiting research. Now, if that is the case, why and how are current research assessment practices limiting diversity? And if so, what can we do differently?
Good afternoon, everyone. It is my great honor to present here. I am Boon-Han Lim, an alumnus of the Global Young Academy, GYA. I'm also an associate professor at Universiti Tunku Abdul Rahman, Malaysia. I would like to share our findings on assessment in career progression, influencing diversity and inclusion in academia. It is also part of our project, Global View of Institutional Promotion Criteria for Professorship, conducted under the Scientific Excellence Working Group of the GYA. We as a researcher is always assessed for our performance by our institution. Assessing the performance is believed to be vital for upholding the highest standards of quality, and that selective processes drive the progress. Now, the widespread of using biometrics have given rise to the popular perception of a universal research assessment system, but does this match the reality? If so, we, the Scientific Excellence Working Group at the GYA, ask ourselves, how can researchers navigate the assessment landscape? To what extent can they put their specific skills, creativity, and initiative to good use? Are the applied research assessment criteria fit for the purpose of fostering strong teams at an institution and promoting trustworthy research in a diverse global research ecosystem? More specifically, we wonder, how do different institutions define excellence, and how does that definition impact the career path of early career researchers? What competencies universities appreciate in their academic staff? Are these the same in different world regions? How do these criteria differ? Do researchers need to swim with the stream, or how can they stand out? How do assessment practices for career progression influence the state of diversity and inclusion in academia? Again, are the applied research assessment criteria fit for the purpose? To answer the questions, a global analysis is essential. We think GYA is the most appropriate academy to conduct the analysis because GYA is a network of young science researchers from over 100 countries with diverse culture, academic backgrounds, disciplines, and experiences. For such global analysis, we set to perform an objective analysis of the competencies that researchers are evaluated. We investigated the promotion criteria to the full professorship used by various institutions across the globe, far beyond those studies which are too prevalent focused on Western Europe and North America. In addition, to avoid perception bias, we focus on compiling and collating data from policy documents, that is, the hard evidence, instead of using the questionnaires and interview. Between the years 2018 to 2021, we collected 238 promotion policies from 141 institutions and 56 countries. The map here shows the number of institutions in each region where we sourced the document. Briefly, the work presented here was facilitated by the GYA membership. Members and alumni from the different world regions were asked to provide evidence of the criteria evaluated by their universities or national governmental bodies for the promotion to professorship. The documents collected were subjected to a round of filtering where they were screened for completeness and pertinence. Then they were categorized by their source, such as country, types of institution, disciplines, and others. The information of the documents were then translated to English, tabulated and branded for its analysis to build a blind dataset enabling quantitative analysis. Finally, the principal component analysis and descriptive statistics results were tested for significance and plotted. Most promotion policy mention three common categories of promotion criteria. They are research, teaching, and services. Research criteria can generally be subcategorized into research outputs, career development, and recognition. Together with teaching and services, which as seen in this table, were mentioned in most policy documents. Examples of research outputs are like number of publications, citations, journal impact factors authorship position. An example of career development and recognition are like collaboration, membership in professional organization, presentation abroad, experience abroad, awards, and keynote speech. Teaching, the main criteria is the teaching task, while for services, there are administrative work, community service, professional service to industry and public service, and mentoring. In the global analysis, we try to answer the following questions. Overall, which criteria are most frequently sought from researchers? How frequently are these criteria not mentioned? How similar or diverse are desired career profiles? Do these vary between governmental and research and teaching institutions? Let's see the prevailing criteria worldwide. Globally, research outputs are required in all policies, followed by teaching, which is the fundamental role scope in the academic track. Award, administrative work, mentoring, professional services, community service, and obtaining funds were also prevalent criteria, mentioned in about 60 to 70% of the document collected. The other criteria mostly rates lower than 36%. The low frequency indicates the diverse attention being paid globally. When we zoom in into the criteria for assessing the achievements of researchers' publications, in general, quantitative methods or vibrometrics are used more frequently than qualitative methods to assess the research outputs of an academic. Among these, the most prevalent were the number of publications, 63%. The second liner, such as publishing in the high journal impact factor journals and the number of patents, achieved merely below 50%. All these three of them are assessed via metrics. Interestingly, some criteria we may think of frequently here to be crucial for promotion to the professorship in our institutions. Example, achievement of citation index and publishing in high journal impact factor journals show actually less than 45%. It indicates that either these criteria are not mentioned globally or they are not formally mentioned in our institution policy. Instead, they are practiced as a norm during an assessment or just self-perceived criteria of the assessment panel. Besides, we can also notice that some criteria appear even though they are not mentioned in our working environment. It shows some diverse requirements globally, and definitely this analysis broadens our knowledge of the promotion criteria globally. How about comparing the use of assessment methods between institutions and governments? The use of metrics for assessing a researcher's output prevail over the qualitative assessment in both governmental and research and teaching institutions. The qualitative method has less than 1/3 of the mentions in the governmental policy. This scenario can be explained as the government does not have sufficient time to use qualitative methods, hence advocating for metrics which is believed to be objective. However, some governments set the policy that all federal universities must follow governmental criteria, and then the metric-oriented criteria are spread to the institutional level. The radar map compares the detailed criteria stated by institutions and governmental bodies. Both emphasize on research outputs and teaching. Governmental policies mention moderately on the mentoring. The rest of the criteria are below 40%. On the other hand, the institutional policy give more focuses to services, recognition, and funding. In the previous two slides, we knew that bibliometrics are highly preferred in assessing research outputs. This radar tells us in further. Government policy favor metrics like publishing in high journal impact factor journals. Obviously, non-metrics method to assess the quality of publications or journals and the real impact of the publications significantly less mentioned. On the other hand, institutions may use additional metrics like the number of citations and authorship order in the assessment of candidates. Besides global analysis, we did the regional analysis, which aims to find out the answers for the following question. Do approaches to research assessment and competencies sought from researchers different across various countries and regions? Are there notable differences between the global north and the global south, and or with the economic status of a country? The bar chart shows a two-dimensional comparison of institutional versus governmental policies and bibliometrics versus qualitative assessment of promotion criteria related to research publication. On the institutional policies, it is evident that Global South institutions rely more on bibliometrics than those in the Global North. Contrarily, in the Global North, institutions include a higher number of qualitative and impact criteria in their assessment. However, the governments here rely more heavily upon the use of metrics. We also perform a principal factor analysis of the various documents to understand if there is a correlation between the single policy. We find that a high percentage of the observed variance between policies can be explained by four latent factors that we interpret as quality of the candidate, which are mostly assessed by qualitative criteria, professional development of the candidate, impact metrics, and accumulated outputs. We then look at the distribution of these factors, summarized by these Wheeling plots as shown in the slide. Documents of high-income countries mention the quality of candidate most frequently. This factor loses relevance as country income becomes smaller. Upper middle income countries rely on impact metrics more than the other countries. Lower middle income countries emphasize professional development and accumulated outputs the most. Comparing assessment methods, institutions from middle-income countries shows the highest reliance on metrics for promotion assessment. In contrast, only upper middle-income countries' government policies greatly emphasize bibliometrics in assessing research outputs. Interestingly, governmental policies of high-income countries show the lowest reliance on qualitative methods, whereas it is the other way around for their institutional policy. Nonetheless, even low-income countries emphasize qualitative methods more than the middle-income. We believe many researchers would also be interested to know if current assessment practices consider the difference in the competencies and skill sets needed to pursue different scientific disciplines. Do they consider the different lines of training and career paths that will provide the best discipline-specific professional development? Do they reflect the diversity of thought? From all the documents we analyzed, 57% of the policies collected are not drawn to adapt a specific discipline. Hence, we denote them as the general policies. For the policies referring to a specific discipline, we group them into 4 disciplines: natural sciences, engineering and technology, medicine and health sciences, And finally, social sciences and humanities. Our analysis shows a striking scenario that all four disciplines and general policies are pretty much the same for the promotion criteria of research and services categories like research outputs, career development, recognition, and services. Even with detailed criteria analyzed, as shown by the heat map, they exhibit a similar distributions of color depth across the discipline. You can see that the research outputs, funding, awards, and mentoring are relatively paid attention to. From the promotion criteria of assessing research outputs, all specific disciplines demonstrated a high reliance on metrics, with medicine and health sciences having a slightly higher frequency of qualitative methods. Even the general policies, as shown in the chart on the right-hand side, also pay great attention to bibliometrics. After seeing the results from the global, regional, and disciplinary analysis, they induce us to ask more questions. What kind of excellence do promotion criteria reflect? How can we define excellence and adapt assessment practice to better meet its purpose? What changes can be implemented in the current evaluation system to support the career development of early career researchers? We observe some diversities and similarities across the board in the analysis. As we know, diversity is a key asset of human society. How do we avoid research assessment creating conformity pressure rather than fostering creativity and initiative, leading to the efficient teams that build on complementary expertise and attitude? How can we promote these changes, especially by having more inclusion criteria for research assessment? Before ending, I would like to acknowledge our team members who have contributed a lot to this analysis, as well as all GYA members and their networks who help to source the promotion policies globally. With that, I would like to end my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
My interpretation of the results presented by Professor Han Lin is that research assessment might be driven more by countries' research policy than by cultural and scientific debates. For example, I was expecting much larger differences between disciplines, and instead we found significant differences by the economic status of countries. More in general, the factor analysis shows that the documents we analyzed tend to cluster into well-defined policies that correspond to broad categories that we were already expecting a priori, such as impact metrics or quantitative methods of assessment or accumulated output. My interpretation is that national policies or institutions tend to have very specific documents in which, rather than asking a little bit of everything, maybe to form a general idea of a candidate, they tend to focus on a single dimension that they want to privilege. In other words, research assessment is very much hierarchical and top-down. This creates a risk insofar as both metrics and qualitative methods often ignore the diversity of researchers, diversity in backgrounds and career paths, but also, I think we don't discuss enough about it, diversity in methods and ideas. So my question for the panel is, don't current practices of research assessment risk pushing towards homologation and conformism? And how can we correct and design better practices, trying to respect and even foster diversity of career paths and pluralism of ideas?
Good day. Following on these findings, researchers, in particular early career researchers, need to be granted equal opportunities when it comes to accessing and applying for grants, awards, fundings, bursaries, and memberships, especially to those who are leading their way into new geographical areas, as this will support the development of global research communities. Sometimes this becomes very untenable on the part of institutions as they themselves are governed with national policies and regulations. In such cases, the research agendas need to be remodeled to include geographically transitioned early career researchers into pooled funding mechanisms with access to centralized facilities. This will certainly boost the confidence of early career researchers to venture into the unknown with courage and creativity, as well as providing them with a better chance to progress along the promotional criteria, as set by their respective institutions. Reassuring and long-term retaining of a full-time member of staff by providing equal opportunities to competitive applications will immensely help them in realizing their local context and globally important academic research. At this worldwide meeting of young academies, we propose collaborative and collective global approaches to maximize our joint efforts, especially among early career researchers. Thank you.
What can we do about misaligned evaluation practices, exclusion, and discriminatory tendencies that ultimately do not allow us, scientists and policymakers, to create and access today's best possible information? The problems arising from exclusion and cultural barriers are structural problems, and this means that we cannot leave these to be solved by those who have been excluded or discriminated against. Neither is the solution among the individual scholars who see instances of unfair treatment around themselves, even if they are relatively high on the academic ladder. Structural problems call for a different kind of a solution. Think of structural problems like the tragedy of the commons or climate change. We know a lot about using principles and rules to solve structural problems. We might want to use this knowledge to foster collaboration and creativity in academia. Certainly, as rational choice theory or economic theories tell us, we need better information to make better decisions, and institutions and norms can be used for making information available and creating better cooperation by some restrictions on general freedoms. Perhaps there is an important question to ask here. How, in the face of structural problems related to the inclusiveness of academic cultures, can we shape norms in the way that results in better cooperation and the protection of everyone's long-term interests and freedoms? Let me introduce you to Marju, a recognized researcher in music psychology and an academic ethics advisor. As Marju explains next, in reference to gender equality, one path that we can take here is ensuring that institutional policies are adopted even in the smallest research organizations, and that we share problem-solving tools in the academic community at large.
To map the situation of gender equality in the organization, it is necessary consistently to collect and publish statistics to prepare and implement the corresponding guidelines for preventing and solving problems with unequal treatment. While this basic truth is clear to everyone, especially the large academic institutions, some smaller ones may hesitate. Our university is too small, nothing like this will ever happen anyway, is a common response. There are too few students to classify according to gender, age, or special needs. Besides, who should do it? The workload is too big as it is. Cooperation between different organizations and the use of common guidelines and problem-solving schemes can help. It is the smaller organizations that benefit the most from central or coordinated measures. The problems mustn't remain unsolved and the victims without help. Young academies of sciences can be empowered to implement such new principles and solutions. Do you know what to do, where to turn, if you are a victim of gender discrimination? Is it easy to find statistics about gender, age, and special needs on the public website of your university or institute?
In this session, we have had several young and senior members of world academies come together for an exchange on good practices for addressing imbalances in our research communities and the impact of various national policies, or those encouraged through collaboration mechanisms and funding. I am happy to give the floor for the final talk on these matters in this session to Professor Tarmo Soomere, the President of Estonian Academy of Sciences and Delegate of European Academy Science Advice Council at this conference.
Dear colleagues all over the world, many thanks to the young academies for the invitation to comment on the matters of diversity and inclusiveness. As a mathematician, I cannot avoid starting from definitions. Science has, in essence, two core pillars. First, obtaining new and essential knowledge, and second, communication that to others. The first pillar is strong only if we include and test all possible ways of addressing the matter. People with different age, having different education in different fields or coming from different cultural environments, ask different questions or ask questions differently. This intrinsic variety guarantees that we shall have the best possible information of today, organized in the best possible manner. This is what science offers today, not the final truth. In particular, small countries like Estonia do not have the luxury of not including all talented people for this purpose. Now the entire world is becoming too small for the same reason. And integration of various ideas, crossing many boundaries of language, culture, gender, race, you name it, is becoming a must. Rephrasing Ester Oras, we never know whose question or viewpoint opens the way to the future that is worth living in. The other side of the coin is communication of this knowledge to others. This is the ultimate point of science for society, to make the world constantly a better place for living. Be it innovation, which means solving new challenges with new approaches, as Peter Drucker mentioned a long time ago, or shaping the legal system based on the best knowledge, as Helen Eenmaa recommended today. The competitiveness of countries, regions, and even continents, more and more depends on the ability of society to extract the best knowledge from the smartest people. This process involves the entire academic community, and of course academies and young academies. In many occasions, their members have the very best and timely information. Also here, as Marju stressed, cooperation is the key. It is thus natural that many academies and consortia of academies put a lot of emphasis on giving good advice to policy and decision making, like the European Academies Science Advisory Council, whom I represent here. Giving advice is a delicate matter, already because scientists and decision makers speak different languages. They rely on different timescales. They often have quite different understanding of how the world functions. Those who need advice usually have no time for listening to long explanations. The given advice must be short, concise, and therefore containing almost no details. And of course it must be tuned to the level of the existing listening capacity of the partner. This is a feature, not a bug, but it normally means the need for severe simplification of the message, except if your partner was Dr. Angela Merkel. The devil is usually hidden in details, we often say. By the way, the original expression actually was completely different. God is in the details. The meaning is God is living or reveals itself in the details. This saying is far more than 100 years old. In the United States, it was attributed to German-born architect Ludwig Mies van der Rohe, but it has been used in French by Gustave Flaubert much earlier, in the 1800s. The idea was that whatever one does should be done with great care and not overlooking any detail. Because the truth, if it exists at all, is in the details. In other words, it becomes evident if you are able to work out properly every single item and look into details. The work of devil is therefore removing or hiding some of the essential details. But this is what we have to do when giving the best advice. When condensing the information to the necessary level, we just have to remove some nuances. We just have to limit the diversity of opinions. We have to leave aside less probable options for solutions. The side effect, sadly, is limited inclusiveness and often biasing towards a small set of the strongest arguments and conclusions of today. The golden rules of science advice generally amplify this tendency. They are formulated by the chief science advisors to the European Commission as follows. Firstly, the advice must be based on the cutting-edge science, the very best knowledge. Secondly, it should be made public. Thirdly, it should come from a person or a body with a clear mandate. Putting these rules critically into simple English means that science advice is by definition an extremely elitist action, as these scientists who make most of the research and provide diversity are out of the game by definition. It is often oversimplified to make sure that large part of society could understand the point. And finally, it is provided by a kind of aristocrats, even if they rotate. Is this really what we want? There are more obstacles in this environment from the viewpoint of the current discussion. The arguments and conclusions behind the given advice are estimated from the point of view of the advisor with a mandate, who is often a middle-aged white man coming from natural or life sciences, where scientometry is almost equal to God. There is nothing wrong in the Matthew effect. In this field it works so that the one who has already provided a good advice is invited to consult again and again and again. But it is definitely wrong that the other side of the coin, so-called Matilda effect, implicitly starts to work. It is not only about less frequently engaging female scientists and advisors. It is very easy to overlook the opinions and warnings of less engaged members of the academic community. Be they, for example, mothers who have to take the children from the school or kindergarten, or international researchers who are not fluent in the local language, as Ville Laukkanen stressed. Even though the damage might not be crucial in single situations, the cumulative damage is substantial. Research results are usually understood in the same manner in the entire academic landscape. The situation is different when we try to convert them into good advice on national level. The features that form our richness, such as cultural diversity, often start to play an impeding role. Because even seemingly identical words may have different nuances in different cities and regions. And this feature often makes transfer of operational advice across boundaries of language or cultural spaces virtually impossible. This is exactly what we saw during the first year of COVID pandemic, a real cacophony of advice. This was one reason for frequent shifts of policy goals. We also saw a fairly massive reaction of society in terms of anti-vaccination movement. It has clear roots in this cacophony. The explanation is actually almost trivial. In the formulation of Rainer Grundmann, as a gamut of social science tells us, rejection of official information is related to a lack of trust in public institutions. This is at least partially a failure of the scientific community. A similar but much more massive failure was not being able to forecast the invasion of Russia into Ukraine. We can do better by being more inclusive and by giving decent attention to views of fellow scientists who are not exactly in the center of the distribution of all researchers, but who work specifically on the problem, or who can see the problem from a small distance. For example, taking in the future much more seriously the warnings coming from small countries who have a powerful and brutal big neighbor. Thank you very much for listening.
This is an excellent moment to start the conversation. Before opening the floor, let me reinforce the messages of this session's participants. Let's recognize that we not only need academic cultures that motivate excellence, but importantly, that these academic cultures are healthy ones. Let's acknowledge that we need to solve structural problems in order to achieve excellence, inspiring and healthy academic cultures. Let's share the problem-solving tools. Let's use the best knowledge from legal and economic theory to shape better academic cultures. Let's illuminate the views of fellow scientists who are not in the center of all researchers' distribution, but who work specifically on the problems that call for solutions or who can see these problems from a small distance. We look forward to hearing your questions. Thank you. Thank you all for being here. It's a great crowd, and we will continue now with the discussion with all of you. We have 30 minutes for this. And so this is the time for questions, and I encourage you to think what they might be. While you're reflecting on the talks you just heard, and perhaps also the talks of the previous sessions during the past 2 days, please feel free to post your questions in the Q&A box. And also, please take the opportunity to upvote the questions that you consider important. You can see a bit of a conversation going on there already, and I'd like you to contribute in the Q&A box so we can take up any questions you may have. My name is Helen Eenmaa, and I will be moderating this discussion. I'm joined by 8 out of the 9 panelists of this session. We have Dr. Carlo Di Politi, Dr. Yensi Flores Bueso, Dr. Pradeep Kumar, Dr. Olli-Ville Laukkanen, Dr. Boon-Han Lim, Dr. Ester Oras, Dr. Marju, Professor Tarmo Soomere, who we also see in person in Arizona. And I'm also very happy to see a large number of attendees in this session, and would like to extend many thanks from all of us to the IAP coordinators who have made this conference possible and are also around to help in case anyone should have any technical difficulties. So now, before I take the questions from the Q&A box, I have questions of my own. And Boon-Han and Yensi, I do not mean to put you on a spot, but let me begin with you. I would like to ask a question from you first and maybe ask others to join in responding later. Thank you for the truly insightful analysis of the evaluation practices. You see that this has already started a discussion also in the Q&A section. Now, during yesterday's discussions at this conference, Jacek Kolanowski, who happens to be a colleague of mine in the executive board of the Young Academies Science Advice Structure, working with Sapea, expressed the idea, and Jacek, of course, correct me if I say it not in the manner that you had in mind, but as I remember, you said that for the involvement of early to mid-career researchers in providing scientific advice for policy, there is the expectation that a person providing advice needs to be recognized as an expert. And to be recognized as an expert, one needs to show scientific excellence. So now I'm wondering, what do you see as a lesson we need to learn from this position, Boon-Han and Yensi? It's of course a pragmatic one, stating that there is an understanding of excellence and there needs to be somewhat standardized understanding of excellence. But what does this mean for young researchers with varied backgrounds? Boon-Han, maybe you'd like to start with a response, and I'd like Yensi to follow.
Hi, good morning. And I would think that because in the university, we always need to have a progression. And that's why when we have a progression, there are many academic in the university. So the university definitely need to select who should be the one that should be promoted. So because of that, then we need to show our excellence. Of course, this excellence is defined differently, maybe defined differently in different university. That's my plan.
Thank you, Helen, and thank you, Boon, for your ideas, and thank you for the opportunity. So I think that we can define excellence, and the definition of excellence, it's changing continuously, and it has been a hierarchical kind of a definition so far, but now it's starting with the presence of young academies and young researchers being more active participants of the academia and all organizations. I think that this is the presence and the voice of young researchers are being more acknowledged, and I guess that excellence can be defined in different ways for different cultures. So there's still debate on how we are going to define excellence, but at the end of the day, excellence is defined for each person as the best that you can do in certain circumstances. So I guess that just bringing on board more people with different backgrounds and respecting the opinion of young researchers who are excellent for their career stage, and incorporating them into the discussions, it's important, you know, to develop these policies. I hope I made sense. If not, please let me expand.
I'm sure that we will continue this discussion much further, because there is also a question along the same lines in the Q&A box. Martin Dominic asks, or rather comments first and then asks, and let me read the question to you and then ask for any of the panelists to respond. But I presume that maybe Pradeep and Carlo would like to jump in, as you have been also working on the study that Boon-Han introduced earlier. So the question is the following: rather than looking at circumstances, wouldn't it be more simple to drop all assessment criteria that are a measure of environment or just luck, rather than being indicative of the intrinsic traits and skills of a person? Should we follow the Hong Kong principles in focusing on the scientific process itself rather than outputs or outcomes? So could I ask for your thoughts on this comment, Carlo, first, and then Pradeep?
Yes. So thanks for the question. I think there are two main answers to this question. In my view, as I think it's a shared view of many other members of our working group, the best way to evaluate, the best tools for research assessment always depend on why are we assessing someone in the first place. So I think the general answer would be there's no simple best possible method of research evaluation at all. First, you tell me why do you want to assess somebody, and then we can discuss about what is the best way. I also would like to stress that sometimes, even as academics, follow into the logical fallacy of believing that there is a given amount of excellence, so that everything has to be a zero-sum ranking. And if somebody is excellent, it must mean that somebody is not. And I think this is a very narrow view of what we really want to evaluate. Finally, and also maybe as a question or provocative comment for the other speakers, I also would like to say, not only as Martin is asking whether we should refocus more on the process rather than the outcome, I would also say maybe sometimes we will want to evaluate, whole teams and how a single individual contribute to a certain place or a certain group rather than single individuals' skills per se.
Thank you. And Pradeep, let me give the floor to you as well to follow up on this.
Yes, so thank you, Helen, and thank you, Carlo, for putting it so well already. So I will say to Martin's question that it is obviously assessment. We can't give it away, you know. So we had to have some sort of what you say, a system that we have sometimes to follow, and it is obviously localized sometimes. So in from a South African context or from a global Southern context, there are certain quality and impact, especially impact to follow. For example, in our scenario, if there is no impact in health sciences, I'm a health science researcher. So there are different criteria now for health sciences, because if there's no impact, then it is not accounted so much. Again, you can add academic citizenship to it. So if not only research and teaching, but you have other things to do as well, committees, memberships, and so there even from young academic perspective, there are certain things that you need to add onto it, and at the end of the day, it becomes localized somehow. You know, it's a microcosm of certain things and research excellence and quality that you have to maintain, I suppose, to maintain the academic environment as cohesive as possible. So that's my comment on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Pradeep. And maybe continuing from this discussion, I would direct the next question to Ester and Olli-Ville. So I'm wondering, and also reflecting on what you said in your interventions, where do you think the current debates on evaluation practices get stuck? In other words, what do you think are the hurdles in making evaluation practices more attentive with regard to the diverse backgrounds of scholars, as well as the diversity of methods they use? Olli-Ville, you talked about the international background of scholars and their ability to integrate in the environments where they work. Ester, you talked about the intersectional profiles. So where do you think the current debates on evaluation practices get stuck? Maybe Ester or Olli-Ville. Yes, you turned on your microphone, so please let me give the floor to you first.
Thank you, Helen. I think one point that could be raised here is the effect of social engagement. And in general, I would say that for foreign scholars, it's quite challenging to get socially engaged in a new country where they work. And I think there a key part is to that the university actually supports that the foreign talent gets involved in the society, so that they get visibility in media, for example, that their research not only make impact on a scientific level, but they also improve the society in general. And if you assess the social or the societal impact of the research, I think this is a key issue that needs to be addressed to keep to bring the foreign academics on the same level as the other researchers in the country.
Thank you, Olli-Ville. Ester, the floor is yours. Would you like to add anything here?
Yes, thank you. Thanks, Helen. Thanks so much. Well, I have to kind of turn back to the concept of intersectionality here, because it really kind of struck me right away, is that the evaluation is also like the evaluation of scientific excellence is also where the kind of intersectionality aspects are not really considered in the way that I think they could and should be. On one hand, we have different kind of academic roles that we all take. Some of them, like some of us, are better in research and laboratory work. The others are better at teaching. The third ones are excellent popularizers, you know. And we there is no cohesive academic world without those different roles, and we have to really consider that, you know, different people are good at different things. So this is one thing. And on the other hand, while doing this assessment, for instance, for teaching, you know, this intersectionality and social categories come in, exactly relating to what Olli-Ville was saying, can you give lectures in native language on a local university when you're not a native speaker, you know, if all the curricula is actually in the local language, for instance? Or on the other hand, can you really publish that much in high impact journals whilst you're at home with your two small kids? all those like different kinds of things that need to be considered. And I think it's very important to actually highlight those aspects in the assessment reports as well. Like, hey, COVID had a huge impact. I was in hospital, or I had 2 kids, or I was taking care of my parents, those kind of things. And I think we don't pay too much attention, or I should say we should pay more attention to those aspects in those assessments of excellence and kind of attestation of researchers as well.
Thank you, Esther. And Yensi, I see that you have raised your hand, and I'm assuming that you'd like to jump in with a comment now on this topic.
Just to complement what Esther and Olli were saying, it's also about what Martin said, that is important to, focus on the candidate, on the qualities, intrinsic qualities of the candidate. And I feel that the way that new research assessment practices, more qualitative research assessment practices are proposed, like for example, in Quora or Infolec, is the use of narrative CVs, for example, that give the opportunity to the candidate to explain their background. Just that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yensi. I would like to bring Marju and Tarmo also into this discussion. And I was particularly listening to what Marju said regarding sharing problem-solving tools and their importance for especially smaller institutions. So when we are thinking about what could help us, maybe this would be the right moment to turn back to the idea of sharing problem-solving tools and cooperating in this matter. So Marju, I'm wondering whether you could elaborate this idea a bit that you expressed in the short intervention, and maybe share some problem-solving tools or experiences that you've had with regard to good practices. I think it would be very insightful.
Yes, thank you, Helen, for organizing and mediating this session. So for a smaller institutions, yes, it's sometimes really hard to implement some new ideas or new strategies, because everybody is just so overloaded with the tasks already. And also, if we are talking about really small institutions like the Estonian Academy of Music and Theatre, we only have about 600 students. So it's not possible actually to collect the statistical data concerning different aspects, because it could be not anonymized so well. But what I thought, maybe if this kind of smaller institutions, they pull up their statistics, they can produce some overall reports to be helpful to different institutions. Because sometimes the tools or the issues what has to be done are really simple and really easy to implement actually. So, for example, if the institution is collecting data, but how is the data presented? How is it easy to find this data? So maybe you need to just make some alteration on your website to make the process more easy to find the public statistics. Or, for example, really small suggestions how to include people more. For example, how to train our listening skills, to let others speak and be patient to listen the whole sentence before you just jump in with your suggestions. So everybody feel they are included and their voice is being heard. Thank you.
Thank you, Marju. And of course, this connects very closely to what Tarmo said about listening to the smaller players on the ground, who at the same time happen to be very close to the problems that require a solution. That particularly resonated with me, Tarmo. And maybe I would like you to ask you to jump into this discussion now. maybe saying a few more words about the idea, about giving the floor to the scientists who specifically work on some particular problems, but also maybe reflecting on the discussion that we've had so far on assessing excellence.
Yes, about assessing excellence, I'm totally convinced that reduction of scientific world into one dimension, sort of ranking of scientists in one line, is fundamentally wrong. We have wide spectrum, which is very colorful, which has several axes and several ways to measure things. In this sense, I'm keeping the position of statisticians formulated by George Box, who wrote that all models are wrong, but some are useful. And the same applies to evaluation tools and ranking tools. They are all wrong, but some are useful for specific purposes. So I think that we should first define purpose for what, for example, excellence is rated. And as I already mentioned, the solution depends so much on from which side you approach the problem. If we think about excellence in terms of produced science or knowledge, what we have in our heads, that's one dimension. But let's think about what society asks or thinks what is excellent. Is a mathematician excellent who can write kilometer-long equation and then 2-kilometer-long solution? I don't think so. But somebody who can explain in relatively simple terms, using the existing listening capacity, for example, why we have to take care of climate change. And that's actually simple. It takes just 40 seconds to explain. That those people are considered excellent speakers, excellent explainers. So always we have to take into account the context. Otherwise, things simply do not work.
Thank you so much, Tarmo. So let me now take some of the questions from the Q&A box. Of course, there are already 17 comments there, which means that I must apologize to some of the people who have asked questions or made comments, because we will not probably manage to address all of them, but we will do our best in terms of giving comments which help to address many at the same time. And I believe there is quite a conversation in the box between those who ask questions as well, so I'm sure the questions and our answers are related. Let me take one from Rula Abdelmasih. And she writes the following: while working on a call for research awards for young affiliates, we were trying to include a point on inclusion and were faced with questions that may appear too personal questions, such as how many kids do you have, any major conflict in region, or any other factor that hindered your research call. And then she's asking, any ideas in this regard on how to formulate such matter to increase inclusion? So this is the question now to you, my dear panel. Who would like to respond? Of course, it relates to many of your talks. I see, Esther, your hand is up, so the floor is yours.
Yes, just an idea that got me, and I was thinking about it, working as an attestation committee member at my home university in Tartu, Estonia, is that just, I think, as an example, one simple box about any kind of, describe any aspects that might influence your research or excellence output. And, this person can choose themselves what has been the major impact on the scientific output. And it can be, yes, I had 2 kids, or there was a COVID, or I had a car accident, or there was a war, all those kind of things. So you don't necessarily have to have this very specific personal questions that everybody must answer, but that this person, he or herself, can think and reflect about, what actually influences his or her scientific output and might be relevant when evaluating the scientific excellence. And I think that would solve the problem of not being too personal in those specific aspects.
Thank you, Esther. Would any of you like to follow up on this with an additional comment? I see not right now. So let me take the next question, and this comes from Jacek, who I cited already in the beginning of the Q&A, but Jacek is asking now. Rephrasing the conclusions of the panelists, should we match the evaluation process and criteria of evaluation to the job which is to be done by those evaluated? And do you think we should give up basing evaluation on previous actions, as it is commonly believed to be the predictor of the future, and replace it with something else? Potential intrinsic traits, for example, or something else. So Jacek leaves the list open here. But what are your thoughts on this? I think it resonates with something that we discussed already earlier. So who would like to respond?
If very shortly say, then again, from a mathematician's point of view, just a point-wise consideration of things is again fundamentally wrong. So what could be introduced into the system is development curve, which is derivative in terms of calculus. This helps in great many occasions.
Okay, thank you, Tarmo. Anybody else? This is an open question indeed, and worth paying more attention to perhaps and discussing further. Maybe Carlo, I could invite you to say a few more words on this, because I believe it connects with what you said in your intervention. And Pradeep, I see you would be the next after Carlo.
Yes, so I totally agree with the first part of the question or comment. I do think again that evaluation should be tailored. There's no one-size-fits-all evaluation. It should be tailored to what the person is to be done, but to be, a little bit more nuanced. On the second part of the question, if you ask if past performance should be taken or not as a measure or an indicator of future performance, I think, for example, this also depends if the institution is looking, for example, for, say, incremental research on which possibly past performance could be a good metric of future performance, or instead if they are looking for some, path-breaking new ideas or new methods, in which case maybe projects about the future, how credible or reliable a certain idea is, might be more interesting as an approach, I think.
Thank you, Carlo. And Pradeep, would you like to follow up on this?
I will be very short. So in addition to the last question and this question, it is, as Martin says, an individualized approach based on one individual, and they can provide a self-assessment of their research, for example, so if they are being evaluated for one job, they provide a self-assessment of their own system and of their own research, of their own career path. And that's how they can, and as Carlo said, there's no one way to fit it, but if you self-assess your own research, provide examples or provide evidence, it should be good enough to meet the criteria. Thank you.
Thank you, Pradeep. And unfortunately, this is the time when I need to start wrapping up the discussion, because our time is ending. But let me do that by mentioning one of the questions still in the Q&A box, just to make sure that we address as many as possible from them. Maria Grosberg-Kusk asks, what do you think if we would start valuing scientists as humans with their strengths and weaknesses, instead of setting higher and higher, eventually non-achievable targets for them? Would we have more acceptance in our institutions, less rivalry, and more excellent science? So let's finish perhaps with this question and think about it further. I'm sure that those of you who are in person in Arizona have an opportunity to discuss that, but hopefully the rest of us will also be able to do it some other time. So now, this is also the moment when I would like to ask the poll to be set up for the participants. And let me conclude with some of the messages from the earlier interventions and the discussion. I think maybe 5 points are worth making. First, we not only need academic cultures that motivate excellence, but importantly, that these academic cultures were healthy ones. Secondly, we might want to use the best knowledge that we have, and of course the kinds of studies that were recently conducted by Global Young Academy. One part of this work that we would do towards inclusive excellence is acknowledging that there are structural problems that need to be solved in order to achieve fair evaluation of scholars and healthy academic cultures. Fourth, in view of this, it's a good idea to share the problem-solving tools and collaborate in this matter, as Marju said. And fifth, it's a good idea to eliminate the views of fellow scientists who are not in the center of all researchers' distribution, but who work specifically on the problems that call for solution, or who can see these problems from a small distance. So thank you, and have a great rest of the conference, and hope to see many of you again soon. Bye-bye.